So today's talk is called Letting Go of this crazy idea of criticism. And so there's two premises of this talk that I want to share. One is that I believe that for centuries and longer, we've been living under very strange spells, like very strange philosophies of living. And we haven't known that they're a part of us. They're like the philosophies of our time, or the zeitgeists, or the paradigm that we've been living in, but we didn't know we were even swimming in the pool. And there are certain ideas that actually have tortured us and really affected our self-worth and disconnected us from God or our own divine self. But we didn't know. It's almost like on some level we were meant to swim in this strange pool, this strange philosophy for some reason. And then, now, in 2022, or perhaps on the 22nd day of the second month of 2022, we have these new awarenesses. Like a veil has been lifted, and we look at these philosophies that we've been assuming to be true, and they're just not. Like, in fact, they're not only not true, they're nonsense. Like, they don't make sense at all. And that's what this talk actually falls under for me. The idea of criticism, the idea that individual people can look at other individual people and critique them and say, I don't like your hair. I don't like the choices you've made in your life. I don't like your partner. I don't like whatever, or I think I'm better than you because, or I think I'm less than you because. Or that someone else can look at us and say these things and we take it personally. Like we think that their critique is actually a reflection of us. Or that their praise is a reflection of us. Like this idea to me is nonsense. And it wasn't my whole life. You know, you guys know I've been a people pleaser my whole life. So avoiding criticism and needing people's praise has been intrinsic to my path for 50 years. This is not that I've been above this my whole life or something. But for some reason, the veil lifted, and now I can't even fathom it. Like if someone was to say to me, you shouldn't be doing this, it's like literally I don't even understand what they're saying. Like, and? Like, I don't know why you're telling me your perception of something I'm doing in my life. That doesn't make any sense. So that's the foundation of this crazy idea of criticism. And so the truth is, throughout our whole talk, that's actually the spirit that I'm coming to this with. It isn't something that I'm taking seriously anymore because I just can't. Like I just, you know, it's like this idea that, you know, women aren't as smart as men, or women don't have rights and men should only be the ones that make choices in the household, or that anything, or that any weird idea that 100 years ago we thought was completely normal, and today we can't fathom that anyone ever thought it. That's the spirit I'm coming at this with. So if I ever sound like I'm really not taking this seriously, it's because I'm not. So I just have to warn you that I just, it's one of those things I can't fathom. But but to be very serious, the other reason I want to talk about this is that this criticism that we've internalized over our lives has really damaged us. It's not only damaged us because it's hurt our self-esteem, it's disconnected us from ourselves because we're afraid to actually live our authentic life, our true path, because we're so afraid of the criticism of others. We've internalized this idea of criticism to the point that we don't even need someone else to criticize us because we do it ourselves. We do it looking in the mirror in the morning. We do it looking at our bank account. We do it, in our journals, like, oh my God, like what's wrong with me? I'm such a loser, and how come I can't make good choices? And how did I get here? And I must deserve this. And we've internalized this idea to the point that we feel like we have no choices in life, to the point that we have no personal power to actually do what we want or to choose joy in life. So on the one hand, I have a hard time taking it seriously any longer. And on the other hand, the effects of this pool that we've swum in for generations is present. The damage is here right now. So on the one hand, I want to talk about the damage. I want to talk about coming out of the damage. But I also really want to talk about the fact that the only reason it's damaging is because we have a philosophy that gives criticism any value whatsoever. So we can look at the damage and we can bandage our wounds and we can do all that. But the number one thing we have to do is change our philosophy. Because as soon as our philosophy changes and we realize that criticism, whether it's self-criticism, criticism of other people, or us criticizing other people, once we understand that this is actually nonsense, like I have this vision from Harry Potter, and they're teaching how to get rid of a boggart, things that appear from your deepest fears, and the spell is ridiculoso. That's what I truly believe the primary step is in releasing criticism, is changing our philosophy. And when we can do that, I believe a lot of the pain we suffer from in that criticism naturally disappears. And then maybe what we're left with is small, and then it's easy to heal. So the first thing to look at in terms of this criticism is it isn't about not being social creatures. Like, we are social creatures. We naturally live amongst each other. So it isn't about not paying attention to each other, right? We are meant to sense each other. We are empathic social beings. But the question becomes, what's the value of that? Being aware of each other, it helps us sense danger. Someone is dangerous. Their energy doesn't line up with us, or maybe they're going to hurt us. We need to be aware of that. We need to have that ability to discern that and go, whoa. The question in that moment, that whoa, is we need to walk away at that point. Whatever it is, whether it's a relationship or it's a conversation or whatever, we need to be aware of that, right? And again, this is one of the great challenges in our society, is for whatever reason we were taught that we weren't allowed to walk away. If we got married, we weren't allowed to divorce. It was illegal, right? So there's a lot of our challenge with this idea of criticism actually comes from a very dysfunctional society, like from us trying to live as divine, infinite, creatures full of choice and potential creativity in a very limited, dysfunctional world. And one of those things is that our choice was taken away from us, which makes us then feel stuck. And sometimes all we feel is, all I can do is criticize. All I can do is sort of talk about how wrong my partner is and what a jerk they are and how crazy they are. It doesn't help, but we just feel stuck. But I don't think that's our natural nature, which is why I think this awareness is coming now. Because we're free. We can leave. We can choose to get a different job. We can choose to have a different relationship. This is within our ability now, so therefore this awareness can rise now. We also need to know if we feel attraction to someone or something or a situation. Does this person have a certain resonance with me? When they speak, does their voice kind of strike a chord inside of me that makes me, pull towards them? This is valuable. It doesn't mean they're interesting or good looking or intelligent or anything like that. There's no judgment about it, positive or negative. It just means that my soul in this moment, for some reason, is leaning in to this other being or this other job or this other situation or this other new hobby or whatever, right? There's a reason that we are magnetically attracted to things. But that's not the anti-criticism either. It's just what is. So it is natural that we're aware of other people. It's natural that we're aware of what other people think of us. That's natural. But so what? If you go on a dating app and you meet someone and you don't feel anything, you just don't feel anything. That's all. It doesn't mean that person, you don't have to list what's right or wrong about the other person. I always joke about that, right? Because I don't joke about it. I do, I think. But, I was divorced, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And a lot of my friends became single after being married and having kids and what have you. And so a lot of us were dating. And it was so fascinating. We'd be on some dating app or some friend would, set you up with someone. And you always knew if the person was attracted to this new person they went on a date with. Well, actually, you knew that they weren't attracted to them if they gave you the critique of the other person, positive or negative, right? If they said, "Oh my God, this guy, you wouldn't believe what they did," it was like, "Oh, okay, so that's not going to go anywhere." But in the same way, if they came back and they said, it's a great catch. He's got a great job. He still gets along with his ex. He's got he's a good guy. You also knew that this wasn't going to go anywhere. Because the only ones that actually go anywhere or that are actually truly interesting love-wise are the ones that say, "I have no idea, but I've got to see this guy again." Those are the interesting ones. As soon as that frontal cortex kicks in and starts giving the critique, like giving the person a grade, you know that there's actually nothing authentic there. They're ticking boxes. It's not real. So it's so interesting because we're talking about criticism, but the bedmate of criticism is also praise. If we're going to let go of criticizing each other, we need to also let go of praise. And I'm not saying, you guys know, I'm not saying never say something nice to someone. Like, that's not it. But it's when we need the praise in the same way that we can't handle the criticism, right? It's an important thing to understand that sometimes we avoid criticism and therefore we require the praise. But we shouldn't require anyone's praise either. If I'm going to make a step in my life, I need to make it because that's what my soul wants to do. That might line up with you, it might line up with other people, and it has nothing to do with my path or whether I take the step, right? So we have to sometimes play with this idea of praise and criticism and how both affect us. So the question becomes, why do we criticize people? So again, one of the challenges of this world we've been living in for the past millennia is that part of its dysfunction is not only do we think we're separate from other people, we have this power dynamic game, this weird power over that, might is right. And if I am above you, then I'm important. And this is endemic. This is a problem throughout our world, through our human culture right now. And so therefore, no matter what, we have this idea that if I can look at another person and I can criticize them, I must be higher than them. I must be more important than them because I can look down at them, summarize them, and give them a grade of some flavor, right? And it makes us feel better about ourselves, right? It is a weird pleasure hit because, again, not because this is intrinsically human. It's just it's something we were raised in. You go right back to our schooling, and this isn't against teachers. This is the system. This is the zeitgeist. This is the paradigm we've been living within. So this isn't like anti-teacher. My parents are both teachers. But in our education system, this is what we're taught, that the children are there and they are the lesser. They are the ones that must learn or whatever, right? These are the lessers. And then you have the teacher who then presents the information and then grades the children based on how well they regurgitate the information or something, or how well they learn it. So we're taught this idea right off the bat. Oh, I'm good at it, I'm not good at it. And not only what this does is it sets up this weird competitiveness between people, between the children, that the only way for me to get ahead is I have to be smarter than a certain percentage of the people in the room, or I have to be stronger, or I have to be a better athlete, or I have to be a better artist than a certain percentage of the people. Otherwise, how can I succeed? Right? I have to be better than you, or else I don't succeed. We can't all succeed. We can't all be special. We can. This is just the old think that we're coming out of. But it is still part of our system that we have to look at. So for example, like even in school, you might have heard of a bell curve. I'm sure we've all been benefited or not by a bell curve. And what a bell curve is if you take a class and you take all of the people's marks, there's going to be a certain number there's going to be a percentage in the middle. Then there's going to be a percentage over here that say got very high marks and a percentage over here that got very low marks. So this bell distribution curve looks like this, right? There's a few that failed, there's a bunch that got in the middle, and a few that got really high marks. So what they would often do in school is if you, let's say like when I went to university, my first year math courses, I don't know why they did this, but they give you the most brutal exams, which was devastating for a pile of math geeks who were really accustomed to getting all the high marks and like really woven into our self-esteem. That was we may have been geeks, but at least we were smart. Like that was a huge thing, right? So I don't know why they do this to them, but they did. So they give us these exams. In my first year university, we had calculus, algebra, computer science. These were our primary exams. And the averages on our exams were 44, 46, and 47. Like, you can't fathom. We all went into university with 98% averages. Like, these are math geeks of the planet. Like, anyway, people were devastated, right? So what they do with those marks, because it was obviously an unfair test, is they apply this bell curve, and wherever you are in the bell curve, they just shift it up. So if this was your mark before, now it's this. If this was your mark before, now it's this. Because they need to have a better distribution of marks. But where your mark is still dependent on the other people in the class. You have to be better than this number of people, right? Like, it sets up the competition right away in the classroom. And this is really important to know. And if you were to, it's funny, a friend of mine, she was raised in Oman, over near Dubai, and she said the competition in the schools to get into university was so high that they would actually calculate your grade point average to 4 decimal points, because that's how competitive it was to get into university, which is why she came to Canada to go to university. And so this is so, like I said, if we're sensitive to criticism, we have to understand that this is what we've been raised in. This incredible competitiveness right from childhood, right through, and then for how many, we were in school for over a decade in this, right? So imagine instead you look at school completely differently. Imagine your child comes home from school with a report card and they get a C in something. Well, what if the C wasn't something in comparison to the other people in the class? What if the C indicated, oh, wow, you must not be very interested in that subject? What if the C indicated that however the school system is teaching this subject doesn't click with your child? What if it's not competitive? What if it's just, that must not be of interest to you? That must not be what you're here to do on the planet this time round. Right? Like, we don't have to throw out all the systems, but when we change the philosophy, even the same results come back differently. Right? Another place that we learn this criticism is at home. Right? Because, of course, our parents were also raised in this same paradigm, to the point that perhaps they even believed with good intention that criticism helps, right? This is what forms you. This is what keeps you on the straight and narrow. This is what prepares you to be an upstanding citizen. This is what prepares you to be successful. So criticism might have even been taught that this was a very positive thing and it made you a very good parent. But we all know it's not true. Criticism is really hard as a child. And therefore it's really hard as an adult. And so again, it's not our parents' fault. It's just it's all they know. They were criticized. They lived in a world of criticism. They went to school where this was normal. So again, do we just have to be aware of this and go, oh, so that wasn't personal. They just didn't know any better. Oh. And then sometimes people would say, well, my parents weren't really critical of me. I was a pretty good kid and everything was pretty all right. It wasn't a big deal. And yet the question might be, so I don't know why I'm so sensitive to criticism. But then the question becomes, did you hear your parents criticize other people? Because when we hear people who we respect or people who we consider important in our life criticize other people, we want to make sure that we are flying above that line so that we can't be criticized as well. So even if we personally weren't criticized, if we're surrounded by it, we're going to make choices in our lives so that we cannot be criticized because we're so sensitive to it, even though we personally weren't criticized. And to live our lives like that. forever, every time we want to take a step forward in life, we have to consider whatever the line is of every single person in our life to make sure that our choice lines up with that so that they can't criticize us. Like, no wonder we feel stuck. No wonder we're terrified to take a move in a new direction or blaze trail or do something like that. And yet, why do we care what these other people think? They're on their own soul's path. It has nothing to do with us. And then when you look at, again, this society that we've had to kind of come through, and it's so based in judgment, right? You even look at our courts, that if you do something wrong, you are criticized by the courts, judged, sentenced, right? And of course we might say, oh, well, yeah, but I mean, that makes sense, right? People can't go around doing whatever they want, hurting people and blah, 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 right? That makes sense. But is it helpful? Is the critique helpful? Or instead, do we look more to something like restorative justice, where if something's amuck and somebody does something, instead of focusing on getting your critique down, what if we step back and we broaden our vision of this person, and we broaden it to their family, to their community, to their ancestry, to whatever, like whatever it is, what's really playing here? What are we really looking at? Like, losing judgment, losing critique asks us to be smarter. It asks us to be more empathetic. It asks us to actually access a much broader perspective of the human being that says, you know what? We can step back. We don't have to just simplify this into some criticism and judgment. We can step back and look at this from a greater thing. It's like, I think it was Pink. I think she had that song called Mr. President or something. And there's a line in it, which I'm going to say it wrong, but it's something like, you say that, no child is left behind, but your prisons are full. And that's the difference. It's like this critique thing. We've been taught that this is a good idea and it's important. And we even hone our minds to be very clear and precise in our critique of things. But does it help? Is it of any earthly good? Or if we forget the critique altogether and back up and look at what else is going on, to think how valuable that is. And this is where, when we shift the entire philosophy that the criticism is nonsense, it changes everything. It changes our entire perception of every single thing that goes on in our life, our relationships, our children, our parents, our communities, everything. Because it's really of no value. So then let's look at, when is criticism valuable? Because we do have this ability, right? We do have it. So it must have some value. It can't just be all negative. I remember when I wrote my book, What If You Could Skip the Cancer? The publishing house assigned an editor. And I thought that book was about women. And I thought that book was about breast cancer. I thought it was specifically about, the oppressed female state and the breast cancer that results from it and what have you. And the publishing house assigned me a male editor. I remember the time thinking, what? That's not gonna fly. But he was so interesting, because he went through the book and he just said, or the manuscript, and he said, Katrina, this book isn't just for women. This book is for everyone. This is a healthy criticism. This is a healthy This is helpful, right? It doesn't sound maybe negative, but it's redirecting the intention for the book. And then he said, we've got to write, and then he would, my original manuscript was a bit harsher, the book that came out. And he was very critical of the parts where I would get very critical of, say, the medical system. And he'd say, Katrina, every time you're critical like this, every time you're harsh like this, you're going to cause a reader to push back and say no. He says, every time a reader gets a no in reading a book, you've lost that reader. They're not going to continue reading the book. He says, what if you wrote the book that it didn't cause any no's for the readers? And I didn't like this criticism because I like to soapbox. I like to be righteous. And it was like, oh. And so I went away and I chewed on that. And I had to rewrite entire. And not only did I have to rewrite it, I had to consider a different perspective. I had to actually reconsider how I was seeing things, that it came out so harshly. And then he says the other problem is, he says, you've got so much data in here, and because I was really into studying the science and the quantum physics side and the chaos theory side and all these things of healing. He said, no one's ever going to get through this. It's too heavy. He said, we need to write the book so that people actually get to the end of the book. He says, self-help books, people mostly never finish them. And these were really valuable criticisms, to the point that I swear, this was all done online, the back and forth of the editing. But if he had been writing it, it would have been covered in red ink. That book was just destroyed before it came out. And in the end, it came out as a book that truly spoke what I wanted to say. So that was really, really valuable criticism. And then when Tantric Intimacy, when I first sent the manuscript to the editor, she was so funny because she says, well, I have some thoughts, and I know it's not very popular for me to have. And I said, no, because I was so in favor of the criticism of editors. I wanted it. I said, you are the voice of the reader. I need you to criticize this. I need your critique because I've already read it 5,000 times. I need your critique because I want this to be readable. I want people to actually read the whole book. So criticism can be a really, really valuable thing. Sometimes on a personal level, criticism's very valuable, because even if we watch someone else and they make a choice that kind of rubs us the wrong way, that's really valuable. Not because of them, but because of us. Because we know, wow, that totally is not in line with me. Okay, that's good to know. Now I know that I'm not going to make that choice. I don't have to do it myself because I'm watching that person and I'm realizing, yeah, that's not my path. That's valuable. I don't have to make that person wrong. I don't have to tell my friends about this person and all their dumb choices. I just have to know myself that, good to know. And vice versa. If I see someone doing something I really think is great and it expands me even thinking about what this person's doing, then that's also valuable for me. For my journey. It doesn't elevate that person. It doesn't make that person more interesting or anything else. It's just a teacher that was supposed to appear in that moment. And it could just be some random person jogging down the street. But then saying, wow, look at that person. They're an amazing runner. Wow. Or look at that person. They're a terrible runner. Look at their form. They look like a duck. That's not valuable. Unless it's helpful to us. And then sometimes it's really valuable to ask a friend for a critique in the same way that I would ask an editor to critique my book, right? If I'm really confused, sometimes we get that way. We really think we're on the right path, but we just keep hitting potholes everywhere we go, or we just keep choosing curious partners, or we just keep choosing jobs that we don't like, and we truly can't see our way through. We can't see our own patterns. So we might ask a trusted friend or a counselor or someone like that, and we might say, okay, honestly, from your perspective, what do you see? Because I'm blind to it. I can't see what I'm doing right or wrong. I'm completely lost now. And this trusted friend will say something. They'll say, well, here's how I see it. From there, we don't have to do what they say. We just have to have heard their perspective. I always take friends, counselors, things like that, like an oracle. It's one of my favorite lines from the first Matrix movie. When he goes to see the oracle, and the oracle, of course, tells him that he's not the one. And she says, I don't know what you're waiting for, but not going to happen in this lifetime. And he leaves and he goes to tell Morpheus, that he's not the one, because Morpheus thinks he's the one, right? And Morpheus stops him and says, no, what she said is just for your ears. And then later he says something to someone else, and they said, don't think of it as right or wrong. Just think of it as what you need to hear in this moment. And that's the same thing as other people's critique. Whether it's good friends, whether it's strangers, it doesn't matter. Maybe this is just something we needed to hear in this moment. It doesn't mean Neo was the one, right? What the oracle said wasn't true, but it was true based on the paradigm he was living in and what he believed about himself. But the wrestle that he had with what she said popped him into his actual reality. Is there a way to read the original manuscript for What If You Could Skip the Cancer? No, I don't even know where. I think it's long disassembled. However, I think a lot of the teachings and quotes and books have all made their way into a lot of these talks and things like that. But this talk really highlights acceptance for me. It almost sounds like criticisms are an extension of fear of being rejected and abandoned. If you being you doesn't belong to the masses and different, then it's problematic. It's a funny thing. So my favorite quantum physicist, David Bohm, he once did a study. He was really intrigued with what he called the Russian experiment. And it was the idea, like sometimes we have the idea of communism, and I don't want to get into some weird political perception of communism. But in its purest sense, the Russian experiment was this idea that we believe that if we're part of the whole, we all are supposed to be the same. That it means a monotonous state, that if we're all going to be part of the clan, we have to all be the same. And David Bohm's theory about this was, he actually did it in, the physics realm of plasma metals and things like that, which is not important. But what he found was the opposite was true. That a collective was stronger the more each person was their true, individuated, authentic, self-actualized self. That it was actually through the diversity of all the individual people that the collective was strongest. It's like if you imagine the internal workings of a clock. You don't need 500 of the exact same cogs. you need all the individual workings so that everything works together symbiotically. And so again, this is an incorrect philosophy that within the clan, we all have to be the same, or else we are to be critiqued and then therefore kicked out. This isn't an actual human dynamic. This is part of the dysfunction. This is part of the idea that I am the king and everyone is just, they're nothing but a minion. So don't go like jumping up and being interesting, because no, I am the only interesting one. This isn't a healthy symbiotic relationship. Even that, a healthy, if we want to do the king analogy, then a king is truly there to serve the people, right? A benevolent king looks at the individuals and looks at all the needs and meets those needs, right? Oh, fun. 222 meditators. How cool is that? Right? So to really understand that this idea of that being criticized is a negative thing for the whole is also completely incorrect. And we know this. Like if you even take this in a really a small perspective and you look at even a group of friends, and let's say the group of friends, you want to go and climb a mountain or do something interesting. The greatest thing is to have a very diverse and interesting group of people. You know, and one person's great at cooking over the campfire, and one person's great at navigating where to go next, and one person's strong like an ox and can carry the heavy gear, and one person, you know what I mean? Like, it is, even in a small group, like a friend group, or even a family, the more interesting and diverse the group, the stronger the group is, you know? It's a difficult thing to differentiate petty criticism and useful positive criticism. How do I know the difference? I think for me, like petty criticism, it just makes you feel like a knife got stabbed through your heart. You know, like you can tell based on how you feel. Like if all it does is tear you down, then that was its intention. Right? That was its intention. That you were right. That's what the other person wanted to do, and that's how you felt. But if someone gives you a criticism and you think about it and you kind of think, oh, maybe that is valuable. And maybe you go away and chew on it. And maybe in the end you realize, no, I'm not going to do that. But it was a worthy chew, right? Then we know it was critical. It's almost like we know it was constructive. It's almost like we need to trust ourselves. You know, it's sort of that thing that when someone hurts you and you say, you know, that really hurt. And they say, well, no, it didn't. That's not how it was. And it's like, it doesn't matter. You're not the one that gets to say whether it hurt me. It did hurt me. Right? I think if we tell someone that something to do or say caused us to feel bad, it's fine to tell them. 100%. Like this isn't like to never communicate with each other, right? It's very, very different to say, you know, I'd rather you not talk to me like that. That's very important. Because again, if they continue to talk like that, it's going to damage the relationship and we may no longer be friends, partners, able to have dinner together, whatever. That's important, right? That's an applied important thing, right? And so that's really valuable. Course on group ethics. What's the best reply to unsolicited criticism? I can only tell you my reply. If you were to say to me, something. I don't know. I don't like your lives. I think you're callous on your live classes. I would just go, oh. And that's it. Because the good thing is there's 12,000 teachers on Insight Timer. You don't have to be here. Or if someone, like, it's not, so, you know what I mean? Like, if someone criticizes us, we kind of just go, they're making a statement, right? That's just their statement. That's their perception of the world. You know, I wouldn't have worn that. Well, apparently, because you didn't. That's what I mean. This is where, you know, my first statement about the fact that I actually think that's insane. Like the idea of criticism, unsolicited criticism is insane. It's like, you know, when I used to live downtown Toronto, there were a lot of people with, you know, mental struggles and stuff, and, you know, there was drugs and all kinds of things. And every so often I would walk to the Starbucks, which wasn't very far where my daughter worked, to write. And inevitably somebody would come up behind me and just start yelling at me. And they'd say, you look like a cow and you should be wearing diapers and you're an asshole. And like, they would just start yelling at me. Like, it's the same thing. Like, it's not of any value. It's nothing to listen to. It's just, like, that person was seeing something through their eyes. Like, I don't discount them. They were seeing something through their eyes. Something very real. But it's just their perception. You know? I wonder if criticism kept to oneself is important or not. Like, I used to be so afraid of criticizing others within myself for fear of being bad, that I really thought my intuitive observation of the other person was the same as being critical of them. So I'd let people into my life that may have not had the best intentions. Well, this is just it, right? Like, no, it's a good point, because we often just don't trust our spidey senses about people. If someone doesn't resonate with us, or if someone, you know, a red flag goes off, that's a sign to walk away, or it's a sign to make a different choice. It's not, we don't have to stand there and make them fit somehow. You know, we again, this I think comes out of a long, long history of not having choice. So therefore we ignore the truth inside and we try to make something work that isn't meant to work, and then we call it judgment. Well, you're being judgmental. It's like, no, I'm being discerning. You know, if I'm dating someone and they keep doing something that I don't like, I can say, hey, you know, that really I don't really like that. And if they keep doing it, because it's part of who they are, it's part of, maybe they're really sarcastic. I have zero tolerance for sarcasm, like zero. And if they really love being sarcastic, then that's really good to know. They don't have to be a jerk. I don't have to critique their sarcasm, but I can say, hey, if you want to hang out with me, you know, can we talk about the sarcasm? And if they're like, no, you should have thicker skin, or you should be able to handle it, or I'm just being silly, then I need to know that. And it's like, awesome. Like, we're not looking for the same thing in relationships. Perfect. Good to know, right? I'm not being judgmental. We're not on the same path in relationships, right? Unsolicited advice is the most often considered criticism. Well, unsolicited advice is also, it's a kind of criticism, right? I don't know why we give people advice that don't ask. It's the same thing, right? You know, it's just like, I will ask you if I want your opinion. Oh, I will. There's no question. If people gave me unsolicited, people do it all the time. They'll send me messages saying, you should do this, and you should do this, and you should do this. And I gotta go, why are you sending me this? I don't get mad about it. I'm just kind of like, it's a interesting, I don't know why people love giving me advice, but is the idea that criticism or judgment, both merits and faults, have a purpose or place. Take from it what you need, want, or do away with it completely. But again, it comes from that question, why are we offering it? Like, why is the other person offering this to begin with? If the other person isn't asking, why are we offering it? Why do we think we know better? Why do we think, like, to really be clear that if a soul, this is why I think criticism is such nonsense, or unsolicited advice, both are nonsense. Because me as a soul, I am an infinite being living in multiple dimensions. I have karma, I have ancestral trauma, teachings, all these wonderful things. This very simplified person you're looking at, right, is so incredibly complex. I will spend the rest of my life diving into who she is. I only scratch the surface of me, right? For me to look at anyone else's life and give unsolicited advice, one, from this extremely limited perspective. It is all I can do to swim in the ocean that is Katrina. Let alone from my tiny little life raft in my own world to look at you on your tiny little life raft and say, hey, here's a great idea of how you should be living. What? This is a multidimensional, infinite being you're talking to. I don't know why they're having the experience they're having. I don't know why they're making the choices they're making. But that's what that interdimensional, infinite soul is choosing in this moment. How in the world would I give advice to that? And why would I? Like, the only way I can give advice to that other person is if I oversimplify who they are. If I try to make them into some two-dimensional caricature and simplify everything that I do know about them, ignore the other 99.9% of them that I don't understand, and then give them advice? And I include parents, children, friends, everybody. I can't fathom it. I can't fathom the idea that we do this. And maybe it's because we've oversimplified each other's lives. We think that we're somehow summed up by whether or not we're in a relationship, or whether we weigh over a certain number of pounds, or whether we have X amount of dollars in our bank account, and that somehow defines us. I don't know. I don't know why we think that. I can't fathom. That's what I'm saying. Like, I can't fathom that we think we can give another person advice. Like, I can't fathom it. It's unsolicited advice. And the number one thing that we have to look at unsolicited advice, this is very different than solicited advice. This is very different energetically, right? If you come to me and you say, Katrina, I would love your thoughts on this. At this moment, for you to ask me this question, I disengage from my personality. I am no longer Katrina. You are no longer talking to me, because if you're asking my opinion, my thoughts, I am now going to disconnect from my personality, because my personality has another path to take. My personality has opinions and preferences and experiences and trauma and pain and gifts and all that. But you don't need that journey. You don't need my journey. You're asking for help. You're not asking for my personality's opinion of you. My personality has her own path to take. So in that moment, when you ask for my opinion, I will disconnect from this assignment and listen here. And I will answer your question. Right? But I'm not answering. But I will listen, and we will listen together, and we will have a conversation where the only intention is trying to find a solution. But both people have come into it with the spirit of seeking a new answer. Right? That is a completely different energy than me from this limited personality just saying, well, here's what I would do if I, because that's what we're really saying. Here's what I would do if I was in your position. Well, you're not, like, this personality has a different path to take. Why? That doesn't even make any sense. I've just been trying to keep quiet. Everybody is trying their best, and if not, I love that. It's like, the idea that everyone is doing their best. To really, really meditate on that. To understand that when we really look at the multidimensionality of every single one of our experiences, we're not just doing our best. We're making the only step forward that is right on our path. It doesn't matter what that is. It could be the third abusive partner. It could be taking that other drink. It could be all kinds of things. None of us know. But for whatever reason, this is the right step on that soul's path. There's no such thing as us knowing what the right step is for another soul's path. Right? So everyone really is doing their best. And it's a very humbling thing. It's a very humbling understanding when we realize that if I was that person, not if I was me in their life, if it was me, I would make this choice in your life. That's one statement, which is a ridiculous oxymoron. If I was me, that doesn't even make any sense, right? But if I say something logical, like if I was you, in which what that means is I carry the ancestral memory, trauma, and history of my line. I carry the unfinished business from the karma of all of my lifetimes. I am on a soul's path to experience something very specific here on earth. If I am you, I would make the exact same choices that you're making right now. Like, it's so important for us to get that if we truly put ourselves in that soul's place with all of the actual influences that soul is under, we would make the same choices they're making. The only way we would make a different choice is if we imposed my reality on theirs. And now we're speaking nonsense again. Right? Because we don't know. We don't know. How do you know if the advice you are giving, if they ask for one, is aligned with their path? Can we ever know? When someone asks me for advice, I never know if it's right or not. Right? And I'll tell you that. I'll say, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like, I straight up. But I will say, here's what's rolling through my head when you say it. here's my perception, especially if it's someone close. Say, well, I have noticed this, but I always know that the other person always has the final say. That whatever I say is just fodder. It's just something for them to ponder, right? I don't know what the right choice is for you. I barely know what the right choice is for me, right? So if you ask for me, my opinion, I assume that you've been called and there's something that said, you know what, ask Katrina. In the same way that I might say, I'm going to call my daughter and I'm going to talk to her or something, or I'm going to call a counselor and talk to them because I feel called to talk to that person because that person has something. They have an ingredient for the soup. They don't make the soup. They just have an ingredient. And so if you ask me for advice, that's as seriously as I take it. That I am just, here's what's rolling through my consciousness right now when you ask me this question. And then that person will go away and see if that fits in their puzzle piece, Where is the balance? Sometimes calling out is a gift, and I have learned from it. There are a million ways to go through it, though, and that to me is the important part of whether the person who is called out can even process it. Feedback can be harsh criticism, but it can also be amazing and lead to change. Where is that balance? It's funny, when I first moved out, when I went away to university, and I lived with a friend of mine, and I'll never forget it, and I don't remember anything that led up to this, but we were talking about something, we were going back and forth, and I thought we were just debating it, and I was 18, and we were both 18, and she looked at me, and she said, Katrina, you are such a know-it-all. You don't have to have the final say every single time. I had never once known myself to be a know-it-all, but it was almost like something rang deep inside of me. And it hurt. It was really hard to hear that, but wow, was she right? I come from a long line of know-it-alls. Preachers and teachers. And I internalized that, and it was really valuable. So sometimes I think people say things, and it is a criticism, but it's like the angels spoke it or something, because it was helpful and it made me better. It really made me better. So that really helps for me. But most of the time, it's not like that. Most of the time, it's just people randomly. It's almost like they're filling space. It's like they're walking down the street going, I don't like that green. I like that black. It's sort of just chatter. It's not like that. I'm wondering if social media has exacerbated this because now everyone thinks they can comment and criticize, make suggestions on strangers. I saw this guy on TikTok and he was this comedian, and he said, it was something like, how we act on Instagram has nothing to do with how we would ever act in real life. He says, so you imagine you're on some beach and some girl is in this bikini and she's sitting there. He says, on Instagram, you like it and then you comment on it. He says, can you imagine if I walk down the beach and someone's wearing this really beautiful bikini and I stop and I look and I go, and then I comment. He does it better than I do, but it was so funny. Yeah, I think social media's definitely done some funny things. totally agree with you. But it's hard for me not to criticize my ex for the way he behaves with our kids as it hurts them. How can I handle that without feeling pain and anger while feeling he's wrong? You know, I can totally imagine this. I think the question becomes just backing up and saying, what can I do to help? Like, is there anything I can do to change it? Right? If we get caught in the critique, then we it just makes it worse. Like, it kind of feeds the fire. It's almost like if we can release that, and it doesn't mean we have to feel differently about it. We feel the way we feel, especially being protective of our children, like 100%. But it's almost like if we can back up a little bit, then we wonder, because sometimes if we're angry about what they're doing, it blinds us to finding other solutions or other loving answers or things like that. And so sometimes backing up is really, really valuable because it just doesn't help, right? So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you soon.